Got it.
Got it.
Got it. We are up. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Grumpy Tonight. I'm Uncle Grumpy, and we are here tonight with our friend Mark Woodward and Lawrence Pasternack. Give me just a second here. I'm not quick enough on the draw. I've got too many screens kicking up. Okay. Well, again, sorry about that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Grumpy Tonight. As you can see, tonight we're joined by our friends Mark Woodward and Lawrence Pasternack. If you guys don't mind, while I try and share this to a couple rooms, why don't you introduce yourself? Mark, let's start with you and explain to everybody who you are, exactly what it is you do.
Okay, I'm Mark Woodward. I wear a lot of different hats at the Bureau of Narcotics. I joined in 1995, so a little over 26 years in drug enforcement. Specifically, I oversee our education programs. I oversee our media relations. I also deal a lot with our drug policy at the Capitol. But I wear a lot of other hats within the administration of our agency.
Got it.
Okay. And Lawrence, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Hello. I see about 10 people are watching at the moment. Hopefully we get some more coming in. Probably just about all of you know me by now. I'm a professor at Oklahoma State University. I'm the director of religious studies there. That's my other life. And I have a great passion for doing what I can to help end the war on drugs and help people find the medical benefits for cannabis.
Great. All right. I've got this shared to a couple of places. I'm going to keep working on that. And I'm going to ask everybody out there, please share this. Share it everywhere, please. Spread a little truth. We are going to hit some pretty good issues tonight. We've all seen the news reports about, sorry about that, the dog. Athena, get out of there. The dog just has to be part of the show. We've all seen the news reports about the illegal grows in Oklahoma. We've all heard a lot of, for lack of a better word, the scuttlebutt about all the different scenarios that might be going on. And most recently, we've heard that the federal government will be getting involved. So tonight we're going to address those issues. And Mark, I want to start with you, and I'd like you to explain to everybody. We all know there's a lot of raids going on. We're seeing you personally post on a really regular basis of grows that are being taken down. Some weeks it seems like it's almost daily. So could you just give us a brief about what's going on, what we're seeing?
Well, it's kind of been a perfect storm because with COVID shutting down a lot of businesses last year, we saw a lot of individuals, especially Chinese workers, being recruited to California and getting into agriculture. And a lot of them didn't realize they were going to work for criminal organizations who were moving marijuana onto the illicit market. And just over time, but really starting in about December, January, and February, a lot of these criminal organizations started to realize that we need to pull up our stakes and get to Oklahoma because their land is a fraction of the cost here compared to what they've been paying in Colorado, California, or New Mexico. Our licenses are cheaper. Our laws are some of the least restrictive in the country. And they felt that they could come to Oklahoma and hide behind our marijuana program with 7,300 licensed growers. They thought nobody would notice what they're doing. And so they started hiring Oklahomans to kind of facilitate getting the paperwork in to make them look legit because they didn't meet the 2-year residency requirement. So they would find local people to basically become ghost owners and put their name on the ownership forms and create this fraudulent business structure so that these criminal organizations could look legal on paper only. And so they go ahead and they get here, they get licensed, they look legitimate on the surface, but 100% of their product we've identified going to the East Coast in box trucks in the middle of the night, and their money being laundered all over the world. And they're all tied to a number of different criminal organizations that we're working, as well as federal partners all over the United States who'd already been on the radar, but typically in places like California and New Mexico and Nevada. And now they're coming here and trying to embed in Oklahoma's medical marijuana program. Those are the ones that we're targeting.
Okay. Let's see. I have to share that again. All right, Lawrence, what do you think about this? Mark's talked about how they've identified all this as going to out of state. What do you think about this? You want to step in here?
So I'm ambivalent. I really am ambivalent about it because some of my thoughts are as follows, that I don't want to enrich a criminal organization that uses violence and oppression, that harms people, that trades in dangerous drugs, that oppresses people, that, enslaves people, right, through human trafficking. I don't want Oklahoma to become an instrument for organizations like that to enrich themselves. That really bothers me. I don't want the cannabis that's grown in our state to get into their hands so they can make a profit. I don't want the cannabis that gets into their hands to go into states where it might get sold to children and so on. All these things worry me. On the other hand, cannabis has been illegal in this country for 85 years. And over that time, the only way in which people were able to get cannabis was through the illicit market, more often than not run by criminal organizations. So there are something like 38 states now that have either a medical or a full access program. And of the roughly 18 states that are medical only, some of them are very tight, very, very restrictive with very narrow numbers of qualifying conditions. And so, basically what we have is somewhere in the ballpark of 25 states, let's say, that it's difficult for somebody to access cannabis. The way they access it is through the illicit market. So on the one hand, I don't like the idea that the criminal enterprises are getting enriched. I don't like that. But on the other hand, that there are people with real genuine medical needs that are gaining access in virtue of that enterprise. And there are some states, Kansas, right on our border, Tennessee, for instance, that have affirmative defense laws where their state has outright said, we will not prosecute you if you're using cannabis for medical purposes, but we're not going to create a market to allow you to buy it here. So you got to get it illegally. So we actually have states that are saying this. And how do they then get it?
Okay, so let's delve Mark, let's delve a little deeper then into these specific cases. And without giving any names or too much detail, I want to tell everybody that I even had someone, some lawyer reach out to me who had a client who felt they were in this predicament and were going to get swooped up in this group of raids. We've heard different numbers of grows that potentially are on a list to be raided. I'm not asking you to give any of that away. But tell us maybe a little bit more beyond, they were shipping it out of state, a reason for us to understand that this is a particular criminal organization in this particular case that we've been seeing that you've been going after. And we'll get to the federal part involvement here shortly.
Well, there's a number of investigations that are ongoing simultaneously all over the United States tied to these criminal organizations, and it's more than one. Several of them out of China, several of them out of Mexico, tied to criminal drug organizations down in Mexico that are already bringing other drugs into the U.S. They've already got their assets here, workers here, and now they're orchestrating moving marijuana as part of basically their enterprise that was formerly doing the exact same criminal enterprise in California. But again, our land is cheaper. There's a lot of different reasons why they're coming to Oklahoma. And they're moving the products all over the United States, and it is going to the illicit market. And one of our concerns is, one, they're taking advantage of a lot of innocent people. First of all, a number of our complaints that we're getting are from legitimate growers who say they can't compete with the illicit market. They're cutting corners on testing, regulations, workers, wages, water rights. When we've got we've shut down a number of these farms that were stealing water from neighbors, pumping it out of their ponds, stealing it from fire hydrants, tapping into neighbors' electrical systems. And we've got entire towns that say their lights constantly flicker now. And we've had electricians say that some of these farms have enough electrical system to power small towns. Some of the workers are living in shanties that they built themselves in tree lines and are bathing in stagnant water, and say they have not been paid and will not be paid until the harvest is finished. And they're absolutely labor trafficking victims, but they're scared to death to complain because one, of fear, number two, desperation for the work. And a lot of them don't know they're even in Oklahoma. They were promised a job, they get in a van, they're told they moved to this particular farm. And it's people much higher than they are outside the borders of Oklahoma and many outside the borders of the US who are controlling the movements of these workers, the product, and more importantly, laundering the money back to places like Mexico and Singapore and to China and some even to the Middle East that we've traced from these criminal organizations that are operating in Oklahoma. And it's concerning. They're driving up land prices. We've found dead animals at several of these farms because they're drinking the runoff water from these grow houses that is going straight into creeks and ponds on the property and to the adjacent property. So you've got environmental issues. You've got uncertain testing of these products. We've seen a lot of pesticides and other chemicals being used at concerning levels inside these grow houses on these properties. They're not all this way. Some of these workers are living in fairly nice conditions. And again, we go out, do an inspection. They've got every T crossed, every I dotted, but 100% of their product we can trace to the East Coast, going to other criminal organizations that are basically controlling these movements of the product. And so those are the ones we're talking about here. We're not talking about somebody who's got an offense violation. We're not talking about somebody who maybe forgot to mention that there's a paperwork issue. They left somebody off their ownership or forgot about a DUI that they should have mentioned from 3 years ago. These are things we can deal with, and we have, Chris, for almost 3 years. We've worked with those who are trying to do it right, but maybe had a violation here and there. We'll deal with those. We are talking about deep criminal organizations that are coming here and trying to hide behind their medical marijuana license to grow for these criminal organizations. And we're seeing collateral crime coming with it. For example, we had a farm workers who were going online and ordering clients of prostitution through a house up in Deer Creek. And the two women that were paid, the prostitutes, were actually, one was from China, one was from Japan, and they were absolutely controlled and were basically victims of sex trafficking. But again, they were afraid to say anything. And we also got over 40 pounds of ketamine out of this house, which anybody that has studied the Chinese culture right now knows that ketamine is an absolute epidemic among especially their youth. And they're bringing that into the United States to cater to a lot of these workers. We've seized more ketamine in Oklahoma in the last 2 months than we probably have in the last 20 years. And it's by the same groups that are catering to a lot of these workers on these farms. So again, you have a lot of collateral crime that's following these criminal organizations.
Okay, so Lawrence, do you want to ask Mark some questions here?
Well, one thing that I asked you some time ago, I guess I'm sure people are wondering, is what percentage of all of the farms that are listed as ones to raid, what percentage of them are in compliance with the state cannabis laws? What percentage of them don't even have a license or are radically out of compliance? Do you have any kind of data on that?
Very few don't have a license, and we hit a big one up in Muskogee 2 weeks ago. It was run by a group out of Mexico tied to some Mexican crime organizations down there. They had no OMMA, no OBN, and never tried to get one, and got over 2,600 plants out there, over 30 workers who hadn't been paid. They were among the ones living in the tree lines and bathing in stagnant ponds. And those are easy. When somebody calls us and says, hey, there's a suspicious farm, and you can see the plants and you run the address and there's no license, you immediately go to a judge and you can get a warrant. Yeah. It's these true criminal organizations, and we're talking about, this is the 99%, are going to do everything right. They're professional criminal organizations. They know how to hide their assets. They know how to hide their ownership. They know how to move the money without anybody finding it unless you dig very deep. And they know how to make sure they cross their T's and dot their I's, getting every piece of paperwork in order. Most of the farms that we've raided and shut down tied to these criminal organizations had all their paperwork in order, but our investigations have proven evidence that shows that 100% of their product is going out of state to the illicit market. Not one single legitimate sale in the state of Oklahoma to either a processor or a dispensary. And we have documented, in some cases, 7 or 8 different harvests and over 60,000 plants unaccounted for at many of these grows.
Go ahead, Lawrence. Go ahead.
So then as a follow-up, I guess what you're portraying to us is that, let's say, at least somewhere in the ballpark of, say, 95% of all of these concerning grows are ones that are licensed. Now, of those that are licensed, how many of those are engaging in the kind of extreme activities that you're also listing, like the bringing in of ketamine, human trafficking? So how many of them, I guess what I'm wondering is the sort of, here's the distinction that I'm trying to draw. Imagine a grow that is doing everything that a normal grow would be doing, right? In terms of treating their workers right and not using dangerous chemicals and so forth, but they're simply exporting it out of state. What percentage of all of the ones that you're concerned about are like that? And what percentage of them are cutting all the corners and doing other illicit things and exporting out of state?
Well, most of them are doing the minor rule requirements. They're completely ignoring the major ones. Like, you have to sell here in Oklahoma. It has to be sold to somebody who can legally have that product. These people are selling 100% out of state, and they're not just selling it randomly to dispensaries. They're selling it to other criminal cell groups within those organizations in places like Brooklyn, New York, all throughout Philadelphia, Boston, to other criminal organizations who are now moving those bulk quantities of high quality marijuana on the streets of those cities, not for medical marijuana patients to be sold in dispensaries. You're talking about duffel bags being sold. It's much like prescription drugs. It's one thing to have a legitimate market for it and a need for it, but if we've got a guy who's out here moving, large quantities of fentanyl or hydrocodone on the streets, we're going to have to deal with that in a different way than we would somebody who's maybe their prescription expired and it's a little oops here or there, their license expired. We're not talking about minor violators. We've dealt with minor violators since 2018 when this first started, and we've worked with a number of people who were not in compliance, but we knew that there was kind of a grace period to get some of these people. And for the most part, and I'll tell you this, Lawrence and Chris, the ones that we've been dealing with since day one, I would say 99% of them are doing everything right. And those are the ones who are saying we're bleeding to death financially because we can't compete when they're cutting the labor, the land, the water, the electricity, the testing. They're being undercut by the criminal market and they're saying we're going out of business because we can't compete with the black market that's thriving in Oklahoma. The legitimate market is driving the majority of the complaints that we're getting from non-law enforcement.
Yeah, I'm just sort of trying to get a picture here. So if I were to categorize it, we have some small number of grows that are not licensed, and those are the easy ones to deal with. Most of them, however, are licensed. Now, among those that are licensed, some of them are more or less doing things right, except that they're exporting out of state. And then some of them are just, with the ketamine and prostitution, doing a lot of other bad stuff along with it. And then I guess the other question is, among all of the illicit grows that are on your radar, and you say that the local businesses are concerned because they can't compete. How many of the companies, how many of the grows that you're concerned with, what percentage of them are exporting out of state, and what percentage of them are basically providing cannabis to a black market here in Oklahoma?
It's hard to say how much is staying in Oklahoma, but I can tell you we've got probably 300 to 700 farms that are tied to known criminal organizations moving marijuana outside the state. Is it possible some of that is also staying on the streets of Oklahoma? Possibly, but that's not what the majority of our evidence shows. We're talking about semi trucks and box trucks full, right, leaving these farms in the middle of the night and going from Florida to North Carolina to Boston, Chicago, New York City. And we're not talking about a few farms here. Again, we're probably 300 to 700 that are on our radar tied to these criminal structures that are created in Oklahoma solely for solely for the purpose of trying to look legal. So when I say they're doing everything right, on the surface they are, for the sole purpose of then facilitating their criminal operation. It's not that they tried to get legal and they couldn't. It is that they didn't come here with any intent to do anything legal other than to get the paperwork to hide.
So I apologize for sort of turning the screw on you here, but I'm just trying to get a full picture of this. So the image that I have is now there's about 7,000 licensed grows. So up to about 10% of all licensed grows are engaged in criminal activity. And the criminal activity we're talking about is diversion out of state, where let's just bring it up to 700 grows. So let's say there's 700 grows. Overwhelmingly, they're licensed. Overwhelmingly, they're diverting out of state. So it's not as if there's a large number of grows that are interfering with the Oklahoma market, that legitimate Oklahoma businesses are feeling that they're basically being undercut by. Overwhelmingly, because there's a much higher dollar value for that cannabis out of state. So overwhelmingly, those 700 or so grows, what's going on is that they're properly licensed, but they're diverting out of state. And some of those 700 are doing other bad things as well, that they're bringing in ketamine, that, they're doing other things that are just very disturbing to the local communities, interfering with, land and water. And I understand all of that. So this is sort of my idea then, that if the majority of the businesses we're talking about are technically in compliance with state law, but are diverting out of state, then why should we stop them?
Okay, hold on. Before we go down that road, let me jump in here for a second. First, let's all acknowledge, because I know we're going to catch a little heat for this, that we want to put a stop to these illegal businesses. We don't like anybody hurting the Oklahoma market, and we certainly don't want anybody doing any of this other stuff that sometimes goes along with.
That's right. I don't want to in any way kind of to encourage or support or to basically provide these criminal organizations with any further resources. I find that all disturbing.
Right.
But
the thing is,
when the diversion is out of state, that's a federal issue, right? So the question that I'm wondering about is, what is, Oklahoma law enforcement is stopping basically interstate trafficking.
wait, hold on, Lawrence. Before we go down that road, I want to go down that we're going to be down that one for a bit, because that's what we're going to start talking about, where we're headed now with the federal government getting involved. I want to wrap up this part of it and talking about these what we all three agree are some really bad actors that need to be stopped. Okay, there's some of those out there. Whatever the criteria are, we could wrestle that around all day. We know it's kind of like pornography in the Supreme Court. We may not be able to give a description when we know it when we see it. So we know what would be what we all want to stop here. But what I want to address now, before we move forward in the federal part and their involvement, is how these all got started. And this goes to, because we always brush right over this really quickly, and everybody skirts right past this. You'll sometimes say, or somebody else will say, well, you find out when you get into looking at the records that while 25% is only owned by this company out of state on the license, in reality, 100% of the money with a payoff kickback to the Oklahoman is what's really going on. What I want to know is, because we've all been hearing about this since the beginning of the program. It's just now we're hearing about it from the enforcement side, because we're starting to see public enforcement. Maybe there's been some going on private and these investigations and everything else, but we're all now seeing it publicly. So where are we with that? I mean, I'm kind of lost here. Let me see if I can bring this back. Who's doing this, and are you going after the Oklahomans that are allowing this, including the lawyers that are setting it up and the landowners or sellers that are knowingly participating in what we've all agreed to under certain circumstances is really bad actors that's destroying the Oklahoma market? Who's doing that, and how are you going after them? Because that's where this all started. And if we didn't have people selling us out from right here under our own nose, some of these people wouldn't have gotten in. So I'd like to know how it started.
Well, and you really have two different groups of bad actors. We've spent a lot of time talking about the criminal elements that came to Oklahoma to grow and keep moving out of state. We haven't really touched on an area that really we need to focus more attention on. It's just kind of gotten lost. And those are the ones who have already been here, but are selling to our processors and dispensaries a much cheaper, more inferior product. And that's where I was saying the local legitimate growers are saying we can't compete because a lot of the ones that where they're trying to sell their product, they're saying, no, we're getting it from a cheaper outlet here or there. And again, a lot of it's just a he said, she said, but they're saying that the only way that these growers could be selling it at those prices is to be doing it illegally and cutting corners, that nobody could sell their product to Oklahoma processors or dispensaries at the prices that their competitors are doing. And again, that's a he said, she said, and there's probably an absolute, a lot of truth to that. Because I know that these businesses are trying their best, and they're saying, when you look at our normal prices and what the legitimate growers are marking their prices versus what some of these stores and processors are paying, there's no way they could be getting it. So the theory is, and the he said, she said is, they're either growing it here and cutting corners to keep it cheap, or number two, they're buying excess and bringing it into Oklahoma from places like Nevada, Washington, Oregon. And certainly we've seen isolated cases of that. We hit a dispensary just 2 weeks ago that was supplying their store with large quantities of product that was untested and from the illicit market in California. But there's probably a lot more of that. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the local complaints from businesses saying we cannot compete with these prices because every time we turn the corner, somebody's selling it cheaper than what we are. And that's an area we haven't really touched on because we've been so focused on these criminal groups that are moving it out of state and laundering their money and using cheap workers and some of the human trafficking elements of it. But to get back to your question, as far as, what the plan is, we hadn't really seen a lot of the problems for the first 2.5 years. We would see isolated cases of somebody who didn't have a license. In many cases, we worked with them if they had a hard luck story that, their wife, left them and they're trying to get the business going. We've worked with those. We're talking about ones early on who made no effort to get licensed in Oklahoma. And I can probably count 3 or 4 in the first 2.5 years we had to shut down because they simply made no effort. It's really been since about December, January, and February, people started being concerned. They started to see these grow houses. They started to hear rumors around their counties. And keep in mind, Chris and Lawrence, if you live outside of Oklahoma City and Tulsa, they know what we're talking about. There's a lot of people in Oklahoma City and Tulsa who are going, what is this all about? They haven't seen what's happening in rural Oklahoma in these other, 70 some odd counties where they are seeing land prices going through the ceiling because somebody showed up, an Asian woman with a briefcase, finding somebody and says, you want to sell your land? And she says no. And she opens a briefcase full of cash and the lady still says no. And she says, what if I come back tomorrow with 3 times as much? And these people are saying, where do I sign? And they're seeing it as a lifeline for a struggling farm. And we're hearing that played out over and over in rural Oklahoma. But the neighbors are concerned because they're saying that they've jacked the prices up. So we really haven't seen this problem hit until around March and April and May. When we got through the winter, they started packing these grow houses full of plants and they kept expanding and expanding to where we've had some that had over 150 grow houses on over 80 acres. And those have been our top priority because of information that I can't get into on your show that led us to those farms as tied to criminal. It wasn't just a, hey, let's go look because we're suspicious that they got a lot of plants. We've got 7,000 of those grows. There's certain things that led us to these people. And it is what you just talked about, Chris. A lot of it is the structure that they're applying with. They're finding local people to prop up these ghost owners, or you're starting to see the same person showing up on over 150 licenses. And the only thing this person knows about the farm is that they go to the mailbox once a month and get a check for putting their name on the ownership, and they have no knowledge whatsoever of the farm.
Okay, Mark, and that's what I'm talking about. Okay, like for example, I had said that some lawyers reached out to me that have a client who thought she was a legal grow. It turns out her previous lawyer had done this to 50 different license holders all at the same time. And without getting into any more detail about that particular case, what I want to know is, are you guys going after that lawyer? And not that particular one, but these bad actors, the Oklahoma ones that are selling us out from within.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got a number of investigations specifically on those people who are orchestrating to get people who would not normally qualify, get them qualified. And when those people are not honest and earnest businessmen, they are criminals, and they are orchestrating for these criminals to come to Oklahoma and look legit by doing the paperwork for them for a small fee. Absolutely. And there have been some people, I can tell you, Chris, already charged. And we're anxiously awaiting when because we believe there's a lot of legal minds that have said this is absolutely a fraudulent business structure. And we will pretty soon, probably within the next 5 to 6 months, have some court rulings that will absolutely back that up. So
go ahead.
Yeah, against both the people orchestrating it and also some of these people who are putting their names on it, who are absolutely have no knowledge or ownership, any day-to-day operations. They know nothing about these farms, and it's basically a fraud. And again, I said there's a lot of legal minds who agree with us, including some district attorneys who've already filed charges on some of the people who are showing up on that paperwork.
Okay, well, when that all becomes public, and I know it won't be till after the cases are adjudicated, I look forward to seeing that information. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, obviously I'm pushing sort of another thread of the whole narrative, but part of how I see this is that Oklahoma is stuck in the middle of basically a national problem, right? And the national problem isn't cannabis, it's about the inequity in access of cannabis, right? So Oklahoma is basically here that's being used by these enterprises to feed a market of people who can't otherwise access cannabis. And so there's a tragedy in that, right? There's a tragedy in that criminal enterprises are opportunizing on that inequity and using Oklahoma to satisfy their own interest in financial gain that nevertheless is still providing for people's needs. Grandpa who's in Kansas who has Parkinson's disease, he has no other option other than to buy that cannabis, right, from an illicit source. And this is obviously beyond anything that we could overcome in our state. Federal law is controlling on this. But I want to just add this human dimension to it that we should not forget that while it is the case, and this is my ambivalence, while it is the case that there are bad actors, while it is the case that people's lives are being harmed locally in Oklahoma by the abuses of those bad actors, nevertheless, it's part of a national tragedy of inequity of access.
And one of the reasons why I've chosen to emphasize the locals that are involved in this is because we're hearing so much about this now, and in some rooms that maybe wouldn't want to be public, you hear things that you don't necessarily approve of, and it seems to be developing a bit of a race issue. And in small town Oklahoma, I'm concerned that particular people of particular races, in this case Asian descent, are going to be discriminated against because we keep emphasizing the bad actors involved in these grows. And I think we should maybe be focusing, because they're trying to have a better life, most of them, not the people in charge. I understand that, but these workers just want a better life. And I'm appalled by the people who are exploiting them, both their bosses and the people here in Oklahoma, our fellow citizens that help them get these, help their bosses get these business started. So I think it's important that we be careful how we address that whole issue. I just think it's real touchy. So let's move forward on to the federal issue. Lawrence has touched on it a little bit here. What we are looking at right now, we've all heard I saw the press conference. You guys probably saw it too. Senator Inhofe's office has asked for $4 million from the federal government to help. I'm assuming with what we've laid out and we've all agreed are the worst case scenarios that we all three agree are bad actors. But Mark, why don't you tell us, because you would know, what is it that the OBNDD wants from the federal government? What is this all about? And we'll get to it in a minute, but my concern is that the amount of money is so small, it was nothing more than a reason to open the door. But you tell us what's going on from your end.
Sure. And of course, let me start by saying we get about 30 to 100 tips a day from all over the state of Oklahoma, from businesses, farmers, neighbors, law enforcement. And the big question is, why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And we try to tell them that, we're doing everything we can to go after these bad actors, but our agency is also still working a tremendous amount of meth pouring in here, fentanyl and counterfeit oxycodone that's killing people left and right. 3 more deaths just today. We've got issues with prescription fraud. We've got human trafficking. Our agencies were spinning a lot of plates. And so focusing on the criminal marijuana organizations is just one of many aspects. They said, what do you need? And we said, we need a 24/7 focus here in Oklahoma, that is their sole focus, to work on these criminal organizations, because we don't want to have to split our time and let other cases get neglected while we're going after farm after farm after farm tied to these groups. And we told our legislature, ideally, what we need is a full-time unit. We would like to have 30 agents, 10 on the east side of the states, 10 on the central, and 10 in the west, that can work with our sheriffs and police, because they know who the legitimate growers are versus the criminals that are coming in. They know who's stealing the water, and they know what's suspicious versus what's legitimate out in their areas. And to do that, we would need approximately $5 million to hire and equip this unit. And that would also include probably a couple of attorneys that work on dealing with the paperwork issues with forfeiture and other aspects of the money laundering, plus criminal financial crimes experts who go after the unpeeling of these layers and layers of ownership and the laundering of the money around the world. You need some brilliant people that can unpack this fraudulent business structure and how these criminal groups hide their organization and operations. To do that, again, we need $5 million. We've gotten a commitment from our legislature through Senate Bill 1033 at the end of session that would allow a portion of OMMA's licensing fees to be used for enforcement. And that is something that's moving forward, and we appreciate that. But our congressional delegation in DC also knows about our problem. They're getting inundated with the same complaints about the problems in our state. And Senator Inhofe's office said that they will request $4 million to come to Oklahoma to help, again, prop up this full-time unit. They're not talking about bringing agents, not a federal invasion, not a hands-on approach. It would still be a state issue. It's simply they believe that there's federal dollars available that can help Oklahoma start a full-time focus.
Jackets? Will we see any of these jackets that are behind me here? That's
well, again, you're gonna,
that's part of our
sure.
concern.
Yeah, well, great question. And I think you need to look at the track record. We know that federally it's still illegal, but it's been legalized in California since 1996. If you look at the cases where DEA got involved and has gotten involved, they've never been completely hands off. But when there's egregious cases of being able to trace criminal either growers or processors or dispensaries back to either Colombian cartels, Mexican cartels, they absolutely have taken a hands-on approach when it rises to that level. But when it comes to just mom and pop day to day, they're going to be hands off until there's a line in that sand that's crossed, and that's where DEA does get involved. And so I don't think that'll be any different in Oklahoma.
Okay, Lawrence, go ahead.
Yeah, so in years past, there's ample cases where federal agents raided grows and dispensaries in states where those states that had legalized medical marijuana, and those businesses were fully in compliance with state and local law. So in California, on the West Coast, and then in Colorado, when they went full access as well, there was sort of another uptick in that. There's lots of instances where federal agents went in and shut down businesses and destroyed crops and so forth. And that changed, however, about 7 years ago. People are familiar with the Cole memo, but there's something that's also very significant called the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment. Now it's called the Rohrabacher-Farr-Blumenauer Amendment. And so in 2014, a provision got attached to a federal spending bill that prohibits the Department of Justice from using any federal resources whatsoever to interfere with cannabis businesses in states that have legal medical marijuana programs. Prior to the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, it was common, it was frequent for the DEA and other federal agents, federal prosecutors, and so on and so forth, to interfere. There's news reports. I was gathering some of them before the show where they interviewed business owners, and they interviewed local law enforcement, and they interviewed local regulators and state regulators, and they were all saying, we're totally in compliance with state law, but the federal government, and then they interviewed a federal prosecutor who says, we don't care what state
Uh-oh, you froze,
State
Lawrence.
law says.
There
Federal
we
law
go.
is this, and law, we're gonna stop them. But that was before. Was I paused for, was,
Yeah, but it picked
did
up.
I just
But
freeze
it
for a
picked
minute?
up. So we got
You're
all.
good.
Just keep going.
Okay, you got it. So until 2014, it was routine for federal prosecutors to go in and raid state legal businesses, right? The federal government was still saying, we're not going to let the states just go ahead with this stuff. And then in 2014, with that federal amendment, the Rohrabacher Farm Amendment, I can bring it up on the screen if you want. I got a copy of it to show people if they want, but basically what it says is that
Your word.
no federal dollars can be used to interfere with state legal businesses. So that's, I think, the issue then that people are worried about with this $4 million.
So
That assuming that $4 million complies with Rohrabacher FAR, then the legal businesses here should not be concerned.
So
No,
Mark,
no.
I understand you're not a lawyer, but what you're saying is that they're not sending the guys in the DEA jackets. They're not sending people, they're sending money. From what Lawrence is explaining to me, who's not a lawyer either, it sounds like that may not be legal. Do we know of a way they're getting around that, or what do you think?
Well, again, I don't know all the rules and legalities of what happens in DC, but I know that the Justice Department has money set aside for states for drug enforcement. And there's mechanisms in place, according to Senator Inhofe's office, to easily provide, without any concerns, $4 million to help the Bureau of Narcotics. That's not to help local DEA and federal agencies do enforcement in Oklahoma. It would come to our office to be used as, again, to prop up this full-time unit of what we envision to be 20 to 30 agents. And even if that request is approved, they're going to make the request, and most likely through the budgeting process in October, November. If approved, you're probably at the earliest talking about the first quarter of next year, sometime February, March, possibly, if that 4 million is approved before it would even come to Oklahoma where we could draw down on it. So we're already going forward because, again, we've got an assurance from our legislature and our partners up there, a commitment to provide money through an OMMA agreement to start some of this up front, get this money up front to start hiring now. We can't wait till next spring.
So this group of 30, this 30 man task force, 3 positions throughout the state that you want, you guys are going to be hiring that. That's going to be an increase in OBNDD staff. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That would be our wish list would be 27 agents, at least 1 attorney and 2 full-time financial crimes analysts to work with this unit with a 24/7 focus. You know, we've got a meth task force. We've got a 24/7 heroin task force. We've got a 24/7 human trafficking unit at our agency, and that is their full focus. We do not have a 24/7 unit that can focus on these criminal. And again, I can't stress enough, we're not talking about the legal licensed medical marijuana program participants. We're talking about the criminal organizations, the criminal element that's falling under Title 63, not under the medical marijuana program. If they stay in their lane, we don't have jurisdiction. It's when they move into our lane and they start doing violations of Title 63, which is cultivating without a license, or moving it out of state, which is trafficking. That is when OBN will get involved. And that's what this unit will focus on. It's not for minor violations and oopses with a fence post and any of that.
Okay.
It might bring some comfort to the state then to know that the agents involved are not federal DEA officers. Because the picture I think a lot of people had was that these like private planes would come in and then there'd be this like paramilitary, right, battalion, right, marching off the plane, fully armed.
We were going to put up that picture, but we thought that was a little too much. So we just went with the jackets.
Right. Right. No, it will be strictly for the Bureau of Narcotics, federal dollars, just like the state gets federal dollars for other programs here in Oklahoma, whether it's food distribution or you name it. It doesn't mean the feds come in and run the program, but the feds bring money for Oklahomans to run various programs. They do it every day. That is what this is for, because they know we need a 24/7 focus or we're wasting our time. And we can't just shut down a farm because they can bring in new plants and new workers within 72 hours from Nevada or New Mexico. And we've seen them do that already. What we're talking about is shutting down the entire organization. And that is why, even though we may hit a farm one day in Logan County and the next 2 weeks later we're in Eric, they look like independent, unique raids that we did, when they're actually all tied and they're just very small pieces of a much, much larger investigation that goes way beyond the borders of Oklahoma. So the ones you've seen us shut down on TV, these are not local violators. These are all part of this much bigger investigation into these criminal networks.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You guys didn't go to the federal government asking for this money. Would that be what, am I understanding that correctly? This was
Well, it was kind of a
Inhofe.
meeting of the minds. I would say it's a meeting of the minds. We had some congressional leaders in Oklahoma, and they were saying they're hearing from their state legislators at our Capitol about the problems. How can we help? And they said, you need to talk with OBN, because OBN's really the state's focus, and we're the ones that are out here dealing with it, but they need help because OBN's got other things they need to be doing at the same time. And so they approached us and said, what do you need? And we told them about this unit that we want to create full time, and a $5 million commitment. And they said that Senator Inhofe's office would absolutely do their part to put in a federal request for $4 million. It's at least a one-time infusion. It won't be anything we can depend on year round, and may not even be able to get it until next spring, but certainly every little bit will help.
We have some concerns. Some people have mentioned some concerns that, are we not making enough money on this program to pay for it ourselves? Basically, why are we allowing the federal government to get involved? My concern, the whole thing sits funny with me, because Senator Inhofe's office still releases the same document when you call and ask anything at all about cannabis, stating that it's illegal federally, and so therefore he doesn't want to change the law because it's illegal federally, which is just a walk in a circle. And then I hear he's now going to request this money. This is just, I hope you understand why, at least me anyway, I'm just a little, kind of looking at you with one eyebrow raised, because I just worry it's not going to play out as.
Can I put up?
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Could I put up the Rohrabacher Farm Amendment, because I think it'll help clarify an issue that you raised earlier, Chris. So it's really not very long, and there's only a little bit of sort of key language in it. So nothing of the funds made available under this act to the Department of Justice may be used to prevent any of them from implementing their own laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical marijuana. So this is attached to every annual federal spending bill since 2014. And basically what it says is that here's all the federal dollars for this year. Some of it's going to go to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice cannot use one penny of it to prevent a state that has legalized medical marijuana from providing for the businesses, allowing people to make purchases, and so on and so forth. The Department of Justice and all the various agencies cannot use any federal dollars whatsoever to interfere with a medical marijuana business in a state that has legalized medical marijuana. So that is the federal law, I should say, on this. And so the idea then is, and Chris, you said, well, how are they getting around? What's the loophole here? The idea is it's not, there isn't exactly a loophole. It's what's being said is that the federal agents cannot spend $1 on interfering with a legal cannabis business. So if this business in the state of Oklahoma, right, is following all of the state laws, then not $1 can be spent to interfere with that business.
Okay,
But
and
that's the problem.
also-
They're not following the state laws. Our state law is very clear. What's grown in Oklahoma has to be sold in Oklahoma, and it has to be sold to people who legally are allowed to receive that product.
So when they're operating outside the law, that's right. When they're operating outside the law, then federal dollars could be used.
And that's who we're going after. These are people operating outside of the state question 788 and the rules and regulations and laws under our marijuana program. They can have a license but still not be operating as part of the program. They can, the only part of the program that they're utilizing is the ability to hide behind a license long enough to hopefully make a profit, but 100% of their intent and their product is being traced either out of state, or even if it's staying in Oklahoma, it's not going to legally into legal entities that are allowed to receive that product per Oklahoma state law. So they're operating outside the medical marijuana program. And those are the ones we're talking about here. The ones that are operating within the medical marijuana program, if they're violating, OMMA and OBN can take certain types of local state action, but we're talking about using this money for a unit that is not focusing on that. We're talking about focusing on criminal enterprises who are not part of the medical marijuana program, even though they may have a license on their wall. Right. They're operating outside the boundaries of that program, and they're now in Title 63 criminal lane.
Okay, and getting into that, Lawrence, a conversation we've had in the past, I want you to argue this point. Let's flip that amendment. Perhaps we shouldn't be using state money to stop from out-of-state traffic. The argument we've had before in the past.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that?
Right. Yeah. So, here's my, let's put it this way, my naive and idealistic, thought. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Oklahoma was able to provide cannabis to people who need it, who otherwise can't access it, right? Grandpa in Kansas. So in a state that actually has created legal protection for somebody, Grandpa has a legal protection in Kansas to possess cannabis, but Kansas is not going to give them any way to buy it. So wouldn't it be nice if here we in Oklahoma had made a deal, had a compact, because what is it, the state of Washington or Oregon? I forget which off the top of my head. I think it's Washington actually has within their state laws that they could enter into compacts with another state to provide cannabis to them. And if we did that here in Oklahoma, we could make a deal with Kansas saying, look, you guys don't want to have the whole infrastructure. But what we could do is we could provide your people with the cannabis that they want, but we're going to have the system, and then we just simply deliver it to your dispensary, right? So they have a dispensary at the border or something like that. Federal government, right? The Cole Amendment basically says, we're not going to interfere with us inside of a state. Well, maybe we should have Cole Amendment version 2 that says, we're not going to interfere with states that engage in compacts with one another. So I'm not talking about having our marijuana go into a black market in another state. I'm saying, why don't we set it up so that our marijuana could go into the states that don't want to create their own program, but into a lawful market in that state. So I just think that there's real space for that is worthy of exploring. Tennessee and Kansas, off the top of my head, are two states that provide legal protection for people to have cannabis, but don't provide them any means to acquire it. And so some of these states that are exporting out of state, some of these grows that are exporting out of state, then give them a path towards becoming a legitimate player, right? That might not be within the culture of these grows, if they're part of a Mexican cartel or whatever, right. But it's a scenario that I think could be explored. I kind of have a dream.
What do you think, Mark? Do you see any scenario where?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
So I snap my fingers, and suddenly that's the world we live in, what Lawrence just suggested. The question becomes, if we are the supplier and we're legally allowed to do it, who gets to supply Kansas with marijuana? That's my first question. Who gets to do that? How do we decide who gets to supply Kansas with marijuana?
So the way in which Washington law has it set up is that the governor shall enter or may enter into a compact with the governor of another state. So Stitt, if you snap your fingers in a dream world, Stitt meets with the governor of Kansas and he says, until you guys are ready to have your own program, this is what we could do for you, right? And right. So they then have a compact and there'll be some sort of system, right, created. Now, who's allowed to then distribute the cannabis into that system? Well, they have to be in compliance with all of our state laws, right? So should we allow then the bad actors, the cartel people from Mexico being the one to get enriched by it? No, right? No, but nevertheless, I kind of have, and Mark, I mentioned this to you a few weeks ago. I kind of think about Las Vegas, right? That it was, mob city, right? Mob casinos. And they created basically a path for the criminals to become legit. So it's like the idea that I have here is that you guys are making money as a criminal organization. What if we gave you a path to become a legitimate organization, right? But then why give them favoritism, right? Why give the criminals favoritism over the legal businesses who are doing it right? So I understand there's an argument on both sides, and that's probably what you're getting at.
Well, and that's kind of the concern, because let's in a perfect world, everybody would want to supply Kansas with their cannabis, and they would all want it tested, and Kansas would know exactly what they bought from Oklahoma. The concern is, how do I compete? Say we allow 40 cannabis growers to grow for Kansas, and who do we decide which farm? Well, we're going to look at pricing. Well, how do I cut prices compared to everybody else? Do they start cutting corners when it comes to the workers, or testing batches, or molds? And the concern is, you're still going to have to sign some type of regulation to keep people, even in Kansas, even here in Oklahoma. And this is a question that we get asked a lot. When we seize, say tomorrow we get 40 pounds of marijuana out of a semi truck from California to Oklahoma. We put it on Facebook. People start getting on Facebook and say, why don't you repurpose that? Why don't you sell it back to the public? There's sick patients here in Oklahoma that could benefit from that. Is that true? Probably. But is that a risk? Because do we know where that came from? How those people in California grew it? Would it hurt most people? Probably not. But would certain people with certain compromised immune systems have a potentially negative reaction from something that wasn't tested? You're kind of rolling the dice, and the fear is always that there's going to be people who don't want to play by the rules because they can make more money, undercut the competition, and we don't want them cutting corners that could affect people's health. And so even if we legalized everything tomorrow and made it available, I think you're still going to have some sort of, first of all, I think you're going to have regulation, because you're always going to have people who say, I don't want to play by those rules. So patient protection, I think you guys would all argue that
I want to say this
protection would be top priority.
I need to point this out, though. When it comes to patient protections, most of us patients bought it on the black market before 788. A lot of us don't want to admit it, but we did. So, I mean, these were risks we took, and we all lived. I understand, it doesn't always work out great, but it's not counterfeit fentanyl. Okay.
Right.
It's not counterfeit OxyContin. I understand you guys do some really important work and save a lot of lives doing what you do in the fentanyl and other drug areas and meth and all that stuff. You're not saving someone's life by pulling that cannabis off the street. You're not. Now I know you have to, but I have to say, when we always come back with, well, patient protections, we want to make sure it's clean. Well, they don't care up in Kansas where they can't get it. They don't care over in somewhere else where they can't get it, which goes into our conversation. Do we care if it crosses the state line? I think, for me anyway, if it's not tied to one of these really bad actors doing some other terrible things, I don't necessarily have so much of a problem with it, because that's how I got medicated before. That's how I went from 9,855 pills a year to less than 2,000, was by buying it illegally. So, that's
the tragedy.
This is the conundrum. Yeah, this is the conundrum where we're all right, we're all wrong. It's just a lot of stuff we got to work out. It really is.
Yeah. We're in this tragedy that it is the bad actors that are providing the needs of people that otherwise can't get those needs provided for, right? It's an awful situation that the federal government has put us in, right? That, we're looking at 38, 39 states that have legalized marijuana, and the federal government won't budge, right? This is absurd. The fact that they're perpetuating prohibition is causing so much harm around this country that could end tomorrow.
Mark,
And we're stuck in this terrible situation.
Mark, I'm betting you guys have a lot of other things that you could spend your time with. I don't think you would necessarily have to cut your budget if we could, I don't know, say go full access, decriminalization, or deschedule, or a number of things to move this forward. What do you think?
We all we've ever asked is that people play by the rules. And when voters said we want this in 2018, as I said, for about the first 2.5 years, we stayed in our lane. Everybody stayed in their lane. We had very few issues. As I said, I can probably count 5 businesses in the first 2.5 years that we had to shut down. And that was because they made no effort to get licensed, and they were not, they were pretty egregious, but the 99.9% were doing it right. And we were able to focus on these other absolute nightmare scenarios of meth and fentanyl and human trafficking and other issues. It's only been really in the last 5 to 6 months that so many of these criminal organizations, and we can't ignore them, because as I said, even the industry itself is saying, please do something about it, because we can't compete. We've got neighbors, law enforcement that are concerned about it, farmers that are trying to deal with some of the issues in their area from water and other things. We can't ignore it. And we can't take a passive approach like we did for the first 2.5 years, where we could easily work with a small violation here and there. The people we're dealing with in the last 6 months, it's been a game changer. Would we love to go back to the way it was prior to 6 months ago, where we just had a few little oopses here and there? Absolutely. We can deal with that all day long. But really, in the last 6 months, things have changed dramatically. And it's only going to get worse if we don't get a handle on this. It's going to get worse for the industry. It's going to get worse for farmers, for neighbors who have to deal with a lot of these collateral issues, and the workers out in these remote areas.
And that's a nice way to put it, these collateral issues, because, I understand, given what's going on. It's like the OBN is saying, we're putting our foot down, right? You guys can't continue to operate this way. You're causing too many local problems, right? Local problems for farmers, right? Local problems for the existing industry. You're causing too many problems inside our state, and we got to protect our state, right? So now the foot is coming down. That's it for you. And so then my thought is this: if you were then to say to all these businesses, clean up your act, right? Don't violate one single state rule, then I kind of just wonder, a lot of the momentum for that $4 million coming in from the federal government has to do with the frustrations of local farmers about their voices getting heard all the way up, right, to DC. And part of it also is, right, the ongoing issue of federal prohibition. And so, this is obviously a kind of big policy question for you, Mark. And I don't know if you can even answer it, but I guess sort of this was what I'm wondering. Imagine if you said to all of these businesses, no human trafficking, no dumping of any chemicals, no use of pesticides, no abuse of people's water or electricity, do everything on the up and up. And we're going to use our $4 million to keep an eagle eye on all of you. And then if you are starting to send that cannabis to Kansas to help grandma with Parkinson's, let the feds deal with that.
I think that you just described the first 2.5 years of our program. We said from the day the voters passed this, you stay in your lane, you're never going to see an OBN agent other than maybe a quick inspection. And we've been so busy, we haven't even been able to inspect most places, because right now, not having adequate fence posts up is the least of our concerns. We don't have the time for that. But you just described what we said all along, and we were seeing that for the first 2.5 years. It was a great program, and 99.9% were doing it right, and they were following the rules for the most part. And the ones who were in violation, they were minor, and we were able to work with them. It's the last 6 months that things have just turned upside down out in rural Oklahoma.
But guys, we have been going for just over an hour now, and this has been a great show. This has been a good conversation. I really appreciate it. Mark, I want to give special kudos to you for making yourself available. Anytime. We absolutely have the same goal. And Lawrence just hit it right on the head. We'd love it to go back to the way it was the first 2.5 years. We'll give DC their $4 million back,
and we'll focus more time on meth and fentanyl and human trafficking. We'd love nothing more.
Well, I want everybody out there to just say thank you to Mark if you ever get a chance, because you know, he is pretty high up at the OBNDD, and he takes the time at almost a drop of a hat to sit here and talk with us and answer questions that even silly old me can come up with. So we certainly appreciate that, Mark. It makes it much easier. I think Lawrence has pointed out some good things. You've pointed out some good things. I think we're gonna continue to bump heads a little bit on this. You know, as I think you understand, we come at this from a different perspective. If we could get rid of, say, all the other bad crimes attached to it, we might want to just turn our backs and not care what they're doing with the cannabis, where you know, it's your job to stop it. So we're not going to necessarily always agree, but this is great. This is really helps everybody understand what's going on. So I want to thank you both for coming on. I appreciate it greatly. We're going to do this a lot more. Lawrence and I are back to doing this on a regular basis. So Mark, maybe we can have you on here bi-weekly or once a month or something like that, or anytime something drastic happens that we all just want to gab about a bit. So
Absolutely.
all right, guys. Well, please share this for me, everybody out there. Lawrence, just let you know, it did switch it to just my friends there during the video. I did get it switched back. So that may have limited the number of people that were watching at the time. I'll get this up on YouTube it'll take about an hour for this to download. So give me this evening and I'll get it up tonight for those that watch on YouTube. I know some people only watch there. So guys, thank you very much. We will do this again very soon. You guys stay there. We're going to say bye to everybody else. All right, folks, until next time, stay grumpy. I'll see you on the road.